My name is Para Mullan and I'm chairing this session, Do High Streets Still Need Shops? Now, you probably have read that unemployment is down. The British economy is picking up, albeit slowly. And there is a discussion that people are more confident about buying. And yet, we know that the number of empty shops is at its lowest level in the last 5 years. So it does beg the question about our high streets and what relevance they have for us. Now, to answer that question, I've got an excellent panel, and I'm going to introduce them in the order of them speaking. So first to speak, on my immediate right, is Tom Ironside, who's the Director of Business and Regulation of BRC, British Retail Consortium, our sponsors. Tom's team works with retailers to lobby government for improvements in the legislative and regulatory environment. Next to speak, on my far left, is Eva Pascoe, who's co-founder of cybersalon.org, a digital futures think tank in alliance with Middlesex University. Eva is leading the Digital Bill of Rights UK campaign to improve personal data protection online in UK. Third is George MacDonald, to my far right, who is the executive editor of Retail Week. George writes a weekly city column and blogs. He has interviewed many of the biggest names in retail. And fourth speaker is Susan Steed, who is to my left. Susan is an economist and an aspiring stand-up comedian. Susan is one of those who founded the Brixton Pound. She's also a guide to the Occupy walking tours. Okay, so that's our panel. They are going to speak for about 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes each, after which I will come to you for questions and points. Okay, so without further ado.
Thank you very much, Para. And I should say I will only take 5 minutes because I think the point of these sessions is the question and answer which follows on. Just a quick word about the BRC. We represent around 3/4 of the retail industry in the UK. So we have lots of the largest companies that you see on high streets across the country in our membership, but we also have more than 30,000 small and medium-sized businesses in our membership through a network of 16 trade associations. So we can say we've got a very rounded view of the issues which underpin this complicated and important area. Unsurprisingly, this is an area where we've been doing a lot of work over the years. We've published a number of reports, engaged extensively with the Mary Portas Review and follow-on government activity. And high streets are a key agenda for retailers from all parts of the industry. And I guess you may be reassured to hear that as a representative of the UK's retail industry trade body, we firmly believe that the answer to the question, do high streets still need shops, is yes. Retailers have a vitally important role to play in the success of high streets across the country. Important to say in this regard that town centre retailing remains the largest single channel where people buy goods in the UK. Even today, almost 40% of all items sold are sold in town centres, more than take place in out of town, more than in neighbourhood locations, and more than online. But this doesn't mean that retailers aren't experiencing change. And this change has important implications for the high street and how retailers, customers, and other businesses use it. Retailers need to adapt and respond to any new landscape, and this has been a constant reality for a very competitive industry. If you look at the list of the 10 largest retailers in 1990, and looking around, you're all too young to remember, it would show a number of names no longer in circulation. So in the top 10 retailers in 1990, you had Woolworths, Freeman Hardy and Willis, Granada and Radio Rentals. So that's not just companies that no longer exist, but to some extent business models that aren't really at the forefront of the sector anymore either. The same list for 2000 would still have shown Woolworths and Birthdays, so it shows how rapidly things can move on. And recently, this process of change has become even more far-reaching. Retail is currently undergoing a profound structural transformation, and this has very significant implications for the high street. There are two main drivers for this change. The first is technology, and the second is consumer behaviour. These drivers are related to one another, but they're not exactly the same. So from a technology perspective, it goes without saying that the development of the internet, mobile devices, and the associated vast amounts of customer data being generated is transforming the retail industry. These new developments are enabling us to shop in an increasingly sophisticated and complex range of different ways. You can order your goods online and pick your item up in the store. You can order the goods online and have the item delivered to your home, work, or other location. You can order in store and have the item delivered to the destination of your choice. Some companies are introducing same-day delivery or even more rapid. And the truly radical can even go into a shop, make a purchase and leave with the item. To put the pace of change into context, it's widely expected that by the end of the decade, the vast majority of purchases will involve some form of online element at some point in the customer journey. So whether it's researching the product, whether it's comparing prices, whether it's making the purchase or deciding where you want it delivered, at some point in the customer journey, the majority of retail purchases will involve an online element. At the same time, consumer behaviour and expectation is also changing rapidly. The years since 2008 have seen a quantum shift in what consumers expect in terms of the products they buy, the service they receive, the value of the goods they purchase, the environment and experiences in the place they visit. Customers have higher expectations in each of these areas and are much more prepared to shift from retailer to retailer in pursuit of satisfying those expectations. Taken together, these two factors have very significant implications for the high street, and there's very active consideration across the industry about what the future looks like and what the implications are for town centres. What property retailers need, where it is sited, and how it will be used are key questions for retailers of all sorts. This isn't to prejudge the outcome of this process, but it will inevitably lead to change in the balance of what is offered in some locations. So I won't try and preempt our discussion, but just a few points from our perspective. The first is that local communities' needs are crucial. The starting point for deciding what a high street must offer must be the local community and its needs. This will typically mean that retail will be a significant part of what is offered, but that it cannot, and probably should not, be viewed in isolation of other leisure and municipal services which communities want from their town centres. The second is the need for a clear vision. The challenge is, therefore, to develop a coherent picture of what a local community needs and what it wants from a given commercial centre. This places responsibilities on local authorities. It places responsibilities on representatives of local communities, and it places responsibilities on local businesses too. There are already many examples of places across the UK where this process has begun or is taking place successfully. There are, though, inevitably places where it's not very far advanced or where it's got much further to go. Thirdly, and it's slightly frustrating in the context of the sort of discussion we're going to have, there's no definitive single solution. Local cases need to be judged on their merits. The reality of the need for locally developed visions and plans means that it's impossible to generalise accurately. The implications of the impact of changes are likely to be felt differently in different locations in different parts of the country. And the fourth and final area to look at is to avoid unintended consequences. We're not an industry that looks for handouts. We do think that there are key areas that need urgent attention if there are not to be unintended consequences. So in relation to public realm, you need to create and manage attractive public spaces. In relation to planning, the creation of a clear vision focused on the role of the high street. Accessibility, ensuring affordable and convenient consumer access. Safety and security, high streets must be safe, secure and effectively managed. And then, a bit of a mouthful, supportive regulatory and fiscal regimes, the cost of operating and investing in town centres, and in particular for us, some of the taxation around property needs to be addressed. Taken together, these challenges will help to ensure that businesses of all sizes can invest in high streets across the country with confidence. And I look forward to answering your questions later in the session.
Thank you. Eva?
Hi, my name is Eva Pascoe. I'm a little bit of a hybrid creature because I'm a technologist. I co-founded the first internet cafe, Cyberia, So I think I was the first omni-channel creature on the high street back in 1994. And after that, I spent many years with Topshop, setting up the first e-commerce for Topshop, Topman, Miss Selfridge, and various fun brands. So I can see the issue from both sides, and I can see the impact of technology, but also the need of the community for the high streets. So about 2013, I was privileged to be invited to write a report about the state of the high street, which in about 2013 was not looking very good. So the vacancies were about 50% high. Many of the vacancies were over 25 to 30% of the high street. So you can imagine 1/3 of the high streets boarded up. And many of those vacancies the places were closed over 3 years. So we started wondering what would help to give the tools back to the community to start fixing the high street themselves, because the government clearly didn't really have a clue, because they gave a lot of money to Mary Porters to put lots of flowers on the high street, but not really to analyze structurally what the problem was. And watching that car crash of a project made me think that really the answer has got to be in data. Mary is a wonderful retailer, but she's a very tactical retailer, which means that she doesn't really look at things strategically. And one thing they missed in the Mary Porter's approach was the impact of technology. So we developed a concept of something called bad footfall and good footfall, because we could see that number of people milling around the high street is still quite high. But we could also see that these people were just not coming into the shops. So it wasn't necessarily because the shops were bad or the prices were high. It was because people have discovered online shopping. And that, unburdened by business rates, tragedy, unburdened by taxation, and with the ability to place tax income somewhere nice and sunny like Belize, obviously gave massive advantage to online shopping. And we could see the gravity of the situation, because retailers who are physical retailers can't quite do it as easily. They tried, believe me, but they can't escape taxes as easily as online shopping companies. So there's a big disadvantage, a very, very large disadvantage. So together with Bill Grimsey, who is one of the retail gurus and my mentor, and local data company, we've done a sort of data scrape and kind of eagle-like hawk look at all the data we could dig out about the high street, and we learned quite a lot of stuff. One of the big obstacles why the high street is not thriving was the business rates. And this is a tax which is quite specific to UK. It only goes up. It probably is embedded in some deep class structure in the euro, but it's not something that we managed to change. We battled for a couple of years to get it adjusted down to more turnover-related tax. Unfortunately, the government thought it was just way too complicated. And George Osborne has recently decided that he just gets headache even looking at it, and delegated it to local councils. So now the local councils will be able to keep the business rates. But we know what will happen then. They will not help the high streets, because that's not what they do. They will keep it. So nothing has changed. The business rates will not be reduced, and we are pretty much in as bad situation as we were 2 years ago, which is a shame. The second obstacle we discovered is parking. And I've just heard the amazing and otherwise wonderful mayor of Bristol, who just cannot see the data showing that the women are the core shoppers on the high street. Mums with 2 kids are the typical and most spending shopper. They can't bike to the high street. It's really, really difficult. I've got 3 kids, and I can assure you I'm just as green as anybody. No way I'm going to bike with 3 kids. So unfortunately, the consumer, who's the core consumer, is being heavily discriminated with the pro-pedestrian and pro-biking policies, because in most of places, you can't get to the high street unless you drive. It's as simple as that. So by reducing parking, by making it really difficult, UK high street has really shot itself in the foot. And that's mainly the councils who are trying to tell people what to do as opposed to solve the problems that really exist on the high street. We even seen attempts, I think it was in Nottingham, which has built 12 park and rides not realizing that the core consumers already driving about 20 minutes from the suburbs, and they just don't really want to drive another 20 minutes from the park and ride. So Nottingham, from the city number 5 in the index of cities in UK in terms of retail, has now dropped beyond 10. And now they are rapidly reversing in building in-town car spaces to actually get the consumers back. You've got to be realistic. It's not about telling people what to do. And the third, but not least important, is basically the vision. What we discovered, people don't really know what they want to do with the high streets. They know that they want the community, and we got a lot of response that people would like to continue the employment on the high streets, because that's where most of us learned our first job. So my Saturday job was on the high street. Many people learned the first kind of tools of trade on the high street on Saturday. If that high street goes, if the shops go, we don't really have a good plan how to socialize the youngsters into work. And it's not a small problem, because around 3 million people today are employed in some shape or form around high streets. And that's about 120 billion turnover. So if that goes automated, if the shops become void and unnecessary because everybody's shopping online, we have a problem with employment. So just to finish it off, my view is that we need to open up debate, and we need to open up the data, what's happening on the high street in real time, and make sure that we understand that if people want an increase of online shopping, we have to look at accountability of the owners, because what we discovered, people who own shops which were closed more than 3 years tend to be big asset managers and our pension funds. They don't care if the shop is open or closed. It doesn't matter to them. So the boarded shops up north, places like Blackburn, places like Rochdale, they invariably owned by large companies which are completely unaccountable. So we're campaigning for a change of legislation. If anything has been closed by more than 18 months and the owner doesn't have a plan, it needs to be a subject of compulsory buyout. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Does the high street still need shops? I think the answer is an unequivocal yes. It's a bit like asking whether people still need to talk. I'm sure lots of people here have been tweeting about all the debates that they've been to, but the point is you've decided to come here and take part and meet other people. And I think the comparison can be made with the high street. People do still shop, contrary to the way that the growth of online shopping is sometimes portrayed. They like to go to stores. On the subject of online, it varies category by category, but in general, it's probably about 10 to 20% of shopping. Most of the rest of shopping, obviously, is happening in other places, including town centres. One place that it's happening a lot, that's drawing lots of footfall, is on retail parks, which are often obviously in competition with town centres, and they've been doing better in drawing footfall. But interestingly, why is that? Is because they have shops that people want to go to and that are convenient to access. And in many ways, they're becoming similar to what town centres ideally should be, because you've got a blend of leisure as well as retail. You've got cinemas, you've got places to eat, they're accessible, people feel safe in them. So why is that not the case on too many high streets still? Some of the reasons have already been flagged by the people who've spoken before me, but it is factors such as parking. It is the cost of doing business in some town centres, and business rates are especially burdensome, quite an outdated system, which impose an unfair load on retailers' backs compared to some other industries, and something that particularly affects not just the great big store groups, but independent retailers in particular. And you do want that mix of the Tesco's next door to the independent traders. What's a great high street? It is about interaction, as I hope I've made clear. It's about transactions. It's about convenience. And also distinctly from online. It's about what you might call discoverability and surprise. If you're shopping online, you tend to know what you're looking for. Even if you're doing a bit of research, you're probably looking for a microwave oven, a TV, or whatever it may be. But that does not replicate the experience of a really good town centre. That said, I think there'll be a move away from what you might call commodity shopping. Retail therapy is one thing. That term shows that people do see it as a form of recreation frequently. Other forms of shopping are a bit of a pain, and that's the sort of shopping that will continue to migrate online. But shoppers will still want convenience. They'll still want to nip out, whether it's for a packet of cigarettes or something that they can just eat at home that evening. And so whether it's Tesco Express, whether it's an independent C-store, they're going to want those shops. The attractions of town centres can still be seen in the number of retailers that are opening in them, companies like Poundland and Primark. And it's noticeable too that many of the most successful retailers are those with shops, those offering multi-channel options to the consumer. So things like click and collect have really been growing, and the shop has been a powerful weapon in those retailers' armory. So the high street does certainly need shops. Shops need the conditions to thrive. They do need easy parking. They do need to be in safe environments. They do need realistic rates and rents. They do need a vision from the local authorities that are administering them. They can't be viewed as a cash cow. So yes, the high street needs shops, and apart from anything else, it needs those shops because retail is Britain's biggest employer. It's creating jobs, it's creating prosperity at a local level as well as a national level.
Thank you. Susan.
Right, hello everyone. I really regret saying I was an aspiring stand-up comedian because I've got no jokes about high street, so it's not going to be funny. But anyway, I suppose I'm going to mainly talk about my experiences of Brixton, because I was one of the people that co-founded the Brixton Pound 2009. So I am in favour. I think high streets do still need shops, and I also used to work at the New Economics Foundation where we had a report about Clone Town Britain, which seems to kind of strike a chord with people that a lot of our high streets are looking so similar, the same chain stores on them. So I suppose specifically one of the remits of the Brixton Pound was to support independent businesses. How the Brixton Pound works is it's a bit like a voucher scheme, so you can buy these Brixton Pound notes. You can then spend them in local businesses, but unlike a voucher, the point is that the businesses try and respend them as well. And most people don't spend the notes, they spend a sort of digital version we have, which is you pay by text message, basically. And around 100 Lambeth Council staff take a little bit in their salary. Business can also pay business rates in Brixton Pounds to Lambeth Council. So I obviously do support independent businesses, but the thing that's really interesting to me about the Brixton Pound is that actually businesses need more than shops. So local shops need a lot more than shops on the high street as well. What I found really interesting is talking to local businesses about where they get their supplies from, and more broader questions about what the kind of local productive capacity is of areas, not just like Brixton, which is in the city, but in other parts of the country. So, for example, lots of independent businesses find it really hard to buy the sort of services that they need locally. Brixton will never be producing its own laptops or be producing its own food, but there's massive potential for there to be more business-to-business services within our urban areas. Secondly, so another thing I think that is very interesting is how much local council services could supply from local businesses. So I've had conversations with schools, for example, who just have no authority really to choose where they procure from. And I think there's a lot of potential actually for more things like local food processing in urban areas, and even more radical is more local supply of energy. So my sort of conclusion from the Brixton Pound is that actually what's really interesting is the potential for there to be more diverse and connected supply chains, even within local areas like Brixton. And so that means we need high streets that can do more than just have shops, that can have support for service sector, service industries, that can certainly look at more local financing solutions. So I really like the Grimsby Review, because on the front it's got a picture of somebody walking past a local credit union. So I think we need more financial services on the high street. And I think we need more radically, more local energy solutions, those sort of things as well. So that's kind of a nice idea about the future. But in reality, what's happening in Brixton? People probably, there was the debate before this was about gentrification, and I think that's a really pertinent question in Brixton. On Friday night, I went to the closing down party of a local delicatessen. The owner has been running, his family's had it for 25 years. He's been running it for the last 10 years. And he's written a really good blog which kind of describes all the pressures on his local business. And some of it is about changing preferences. He says that, people aren't shopping with him as much. He says that there's lots of council offices have closed down, so they're not coming out for lunch. But mainly the pressure for him has been that Network Rail are going to roughly triple the rent for his business. And if you're selling vegetables, you just can't pay that sort of increased rent. So there's a real pressure on land prices in Brixton, which is driving out services that supply things that supply basic services, and putting a lot of pressure on businesses to open kind of high-end restaurants. I think it's a shame if that's all that we have. And what's amplified this problem, I think, is that the council, Lambeth Council, who maybe in normal times would have been a counterbalance to this pressure of increasing rents, are actually adding to it. Because although the council have got a broader remit than making profit, because of the pressure on their budgets, they're actually using the high street to make profit, to cross-subsidise their other services. And I don't really blame Lambeth Council, because if I was in their position, I had to choose whether to close a children's centre or to make some more rent on the high street. I don't know what I would do. So I think they're in a really difficult position. A lot of our local authorities face that challenge. However, I think kind of a couple of broader things I wanted to talk about, just from my experience of walking around urban areas, is firstly, I think in the future, it's not just whether high streets need shops, but I think our high streets might look very different in the future. So quite a lot of the thoroughways that we have, they were initially there because we had horse and carriages, then the car took over. But maybe in the future, we would have a smaller role for the car. And I say that with caution, because I know that in Brixton, the car park is really important for local traders, and now there is no local car park, that's just Tesco's. That's really bad for the market. But there may be places where we might want to get rid of some of the big roads that we have and maybe use that land for something else, like housing. So I think that's maybe a question for the future. I also think there are kind of big questions about our urban infrastructure and our transport infrastructure that we could decarbonise. There's a big potential there, positive potential. The second thing, the last thing I'll talk about, is the thing that I'm most worried about is actually inequality. So in Brixton, where I live, the big covered markets, they were built in the 1930s. And 1930s Britain was obviously a very different place, lots of terrible things happening. The Second World War was about to break out. But what happened in the post-war period was we had a lot of public investment. We had declining levels of inequality. And I think that's really interesting about how you look at some of the structures that were built in those times. Now Brixton Market, I don't think it is a place that everyone feels that they can go to, the covered market certainly. And I think we're losing places where people from different backgrounds or different income levels can meet and interact. I think that's a real shame about our high streets. So I was thinking that I like Brixton Library, I go there a lot to work, and I was thinking that I want there to be more spaces like this where anyone can come to and can connect with people. I was thinking that then I had to hide from someone I knew because I was working on a really big deadline and I hadn't really got time to talk to her. That was supposed to be a joke, but it didn't really work. But I suppose what I'm talking about is this big tension we have between wanting to connect with people and our sort of time-poor, pressurised working lives. And that's the last thing that I think that might change a lot in the future. I think work could change radically. There have been quite a lot of debates this weekend about increasing automation, which I think could be a really positive thing if we can also change the way our narrative is around the value we derive from work. So I think if we could change our welfare state, if we could change the amount of pressure that we have on people to be in work, I think there could be real potential from what our high streets would look like if people are working from home or are working on freelance projects, if other things change, so if the welfare state changes to support that. So, in summary, I think we could have a future where we have high streets that are redesigned, that support more local production of things like financial services, energy, and potentially other services. I think that could be a really positive thing. But I worry that that's not the direction we're going down, and levels of inequality and other pressures on the economy are kind of going in the opposite direction.
Okay, I'm going to throw it out.
Hello, yeah, building on the Clone Town Britain. For me, I'm not a big shopper, but the high street's really boring. And it's really boring because it doesn't give me what I need. 20 years ago, as a tall person, extremely tall, I could go into most clothes shops or most shoe shops and find something that would fit me. Now I know that I can go to a really crappy place on Oxford Street, or I can go up to Hampstead and I can get a pair of shoes. But I don't think this is because of globalization. You talk about the cost of margins and the battle with the online world, the competition. But I think it's globalization that's causing this, because the supply chain, you go to the big factory, you get sizes from, 1 to 4, but you're not going to get the sort of -0 size or the +6 size, because the quantities, the volumes you're dealing with, shipping across the world, distributing to all the outlets around the world, means that everything's becoming much more generic. And I think that's why the high street's boring, because everything's the same in a clone town way.
Okay, interesting point.
My name's Kieran. I'm the digital director for Blackwell's. Retail's quite difficult because it's such a broad range of retailers. Everyone from Poundland through to the high street booksellers like ourselves. Now, I think there's a number of challenges out there, and some of which are cultural. There was quite a big debate earlier today around the importance of reading and serious reading on the not on the high street, but we're in the first time in recorded history where there are fewer than 1,000 bookshops open in the UK. And I think there has to be a correlation between some of the actions that, some of the results that we're seeing within retail and some of the cultural impact that there is generally in society. Now, the internet's actually done a lot of very good things for retail. It's improved the supply chain massively. It's given a huge number of extra choices. It's driven down prices in particular areas. And for the book trade, we've gone from a point of having around 1 million titles available to over 12 million within 24 hours, pretty much. However, it's a hygiene factor now. And I think the advantage that high street retailers have is that we've got the people and the experts that if we can actually start to merge those channels and bring a personality online that we've got offline and make the destination high street very important, then actually we've got quite a killer combination of skills there. Our Oxford shop alone runs more than 360 events a year. We sponsor the Oxford Literary Festival. We've got a huge number of people coming to debate and talk all the time, including Frank Frady and Mick Hume soon, if you fancy coming to Oxford. And actually, that's a crucial part of what we do, and to bring value to what we do. And I know that's different from selling shoes and trousers, but that's part of the high street.
Thank you. Yep. Matt.
Thank you. Eva, I was really interested when you used the word tactical about how retail works, because it certainly is the case that if you're not fast moving and you're not really responding to customer needs, immediately you go out of business. And how does that fit, and how should we think about that in relation to longer term agendas of, say, we have 25-year leases, we have kind of shareholders who are looking at long-term pension funds, but then chucking out chief execs on a quarterly basis. So how do we merge this kind of the retail need to be really tactical and the need to kind of make long-term strategic decisions?
My question is really about shopping centres. We've built all these shopping centres, we're drawing people out of the city with them. And now they exist, you can go there, you can get almost anything that you need. You can park for free, you can go for dinner afterwards. How do you get people to go back into the town centre when you've just drawn them out of it?
Yes, can I come back to the first one, niche access? I think the reverse is true about the niche access to sizes which are high and low and varying above average. You're right that you can't get any of this on the high street. You'll be lucky to get size 12 of anything these days because the cost of stock is just out of proportion to the holding stock is just too expensive. But online, there is increasing amount of niche providers because they use the big data to figure out what exactly are the markets. And because the manufacturer is so far away, they're able to provide in great detail what's needed. So I think the consumer, theoretically at least, should gain. So tall and mighty and high and tall Sally, people like that, they have expanded because they can have a catchment area way and above the physical stores. So where the niches are concerned, the consumer probably is winning, but it's not necessarily executed in the right way. I understand that. In terms of the strategic versus tactical, this is a very interesting question. I had the pleasure of working in a PLC, and I'm probably a minority because these PLCs are disappearing from the landscape. It's all going to private equity. When Arcadia was a PLC, it had an amazing sustainability policy, CSR policy. More or less things were sourced ethically, and more or less it was sort of going the right direction. Alas, when it became private company, that all went through the window, including people who actually managed these areas. And I can see it more and more where we deal, because in my day job, I do a lot of retail consultancy. The moment you talk to private equity, they're just not interested in anything more than 10 minutes time span. And the market is going increasingly towards buyouts and private equity. So we have a fundamental problem of ownership structure, because those formations are genuinely not interested in anybody's future except for their own, and it's a very, very short perspective. So that's not fixable easily by technology. That has to be fixed by legislation and politics, which is quite a long journey. PLCs on the whole, like Marks and Spencer, have done tremendous contribution to sustainability, and they have turned 200 million budget into sustainable packaging, which anybody could do, but only a PLC will do. So there are very, very big differences in what's owned by whom and how they're accountable. So I think there are people who probably know more about it, but to me, the taxation on the high street is taxation of ethnic minorities and women, because those are the sectors which hold most independent shops. And it's totally unfair, and it's totally counterintuitive, keeping that business tax so high and strategically killing the people who are the most entrepreneurial one. And I tell you, my heart just bled when I was looking at people who started with me in 94, went through hell and high water with the recession, this recession, that recession, just about emerged in about 2011, thinking, maybe it will get better. And, the only thing which got responded to immediately was the Asian landlords and the pension funds and the asset managers whacking the 20% up increase on the rents, which absolutely wiped out all the old guard because people just gave up. So these are not legal, boring decisions. These are decisions that affect all of us, affect our communities and people who actually drive the high streets.
Yeah, can I come in on this business of the high street being boring? I really dispute it, actually. If you look at the ways in which retailers democratized all sorts of products in the last 20, 30 years, it's quite astonishing. Whether you go to the supermarket and you have this incredible variety of food, anything from Italian to India, all sorts of drinks that were the preserve of, the better off just 10 or 15 years ago. That is all there now at our fingertips. One thing that online has done is create opportunities for providers of more niche product, and that can benefit the high street. So if you're buying clothes, if you're tall or small, you can buy things online. You can have it delivered to Collect Plus or these sorts of networks, which actually enable retailers, often independent retailers, to play off the opportunity that they have to key into online trends. You've got companies like eBay that are putting individuals together with customers. If you want, you can go and collect your eBay orders from Argos. So there is a great deal of diversity on the high street. Some of the biggest names are bringing that to us. I don't think there's any argument, though, that in certain areas we're probably overshopped. But retail is a pretty red in tooth and claw business. A lot of companies went down over the recession. And if you're not actually providing something that shoppers want, you won't be around very long. So if it is true that the high street is boring, it won't be around very long. But I would dispute that point of view.
And the only thing I'd add on the shopping centres point, because clearly there's a perception there around the fact that shopping centres have some sort of unfair advantage. I think I'd say they're successful because, as I think George alluded to in his opening comments, they're successful because they're meeting customer needs. But that's not to underestimate the fact that lots of towns and cities have some very significant inbuilt advantages as well in terms of the heritage which they have, in terms of some of the municipal facilities. And what you're seeing in the most successful attempts where local partnerships are taking forward visions for new areas, that local towns and cities are harnessing what they offer alongside their retail portfolio to really drive really exciting sort of consumer demand and customer demand and meeting the needs of those communities.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I'm sorry the gentleman can't get his taller clothes. I don't have an explanation for that. It seems counter to the argument that Blackwell's stocking a much more diverse range of books. So I don't. But I guess Eva's already made the point that it's because shopkeepers are under such pressure to make margins that they can't keep stock that is only for a small number of people. I don't know much about out of towns. I suppose I was really influenced by Anna Minton's book called Ground Control, where she talks about developments within London, like the Westfield Shopping Centre, and she talks about how they're specifically designed actually to keep people that live in the local area out. And I don't know if that's still true, and I don't know how true that is, but I certainly think it feels to me quite sad that that I feel that some of these shopping centres are just really just for people to spend money in, and if you're not spending money, you're not made to feel like you have a place there. So I am feeling that town centres could do something better than that, could fuse different types of shopping alongside other services, alongside activities for families, and alongside perhaps redesigned universities or public institutions. That would be really exciting to me. Whether that's something that's going to happen, I don't know. There are a few things that are quite interesting that are happening in Brixton. So there's a reuse centre that's open in some abandoned garages, which is hosting a real range of different types of reuse and does workshops and lots of different activities like that. I think that's quite interesting. There's been some activities that the local trade associations running within the outdoor street markets, which are more based around music and kind of festival kind of atmospheres. I think that's quite interesting. So I think there is that sort of potential to make high streets better than out of town shopping centres and make people want to come to them.
Eva?
I have a little comeback on it. I'm Polish, so I came from a country which, in my youth, there was no shops at all. And do I want to come back to it? I kind of dread it because it was pretty damn boring. You think there were boring shops? Try no shops at all. That was pretty boring. And it was basically this sea of greyness everywhere. And if you wanted to be creative, you had to do your own stuff. So we all made our own clothes, and that was quite fun. The moment the West came, everybody forgotten how to make their own shops. So, there is a little element of creativity in the scarcity. But I wouldn't recommend going back to no shops. It wasn't good. But when you look at what people imagine as a beautiful, ideal high street, it tends to be fashion stores, beautiful windows, amazing visual experience, clean and green. But when you actually look at data, it tells something different. The data, which Amazon has drawn quite heavily on, what people really buy on the high street, has now been transformed into Amazon offering in Wimbledon, Surbiton and Wandsworth, 2 hours delivery of the most popular product. I have a wild guess. What are those most popular products? Nappies?
Yes.
Beer and game consoles. I'm not kidding. If you look at the offer in the suburbs, which just virtually has been open a few days ago, what's the set of goods available for 2-hour delivery? It's the most ridiculous things that Bored Dad would want when he's on a babysitting duty. So the reality of the high street, when you actually use data to see what people really do, it's not visual, beautiful fashion, because that fashion we buy online. That has gone. So I think data. It's where we need to manage and where we need to share to manage better. And a good example of it was in this amazing place in Tottenham Hale, which is basically developed quite heavily at the moment. And they did a lot of analysis, what's missing in Tottenham Hale? And discovered there was a lot of people with medical problems. There was a lot of people who were commuting to dialysis quite far away. So they took out a dialysis unit out of hospital and put it very close to the high street. it was a genius stroke because people don't have to travel far. Two, they create traffic and footfall, good footfall. While they're milling around waiting for whatever, they do a bit of shopping, and suddenly from really a quite low level and failing area, it's now picking up. So I thought this is a really nice area for us to discuss. Should we direct a touch of somebody else's money? So be it NHS, be it Camden councils, or people who have to have something for the local community, but it tends to be placed away up in the suburbs or in the park or somewhere not immediately accessible. I think we have to start looking a bit more creatively how we generate the footfall on the high street to have the community face-to-face approach.
Thank you. So very useful. If you've got some creative ideas how to make our high streets a lot more used and community-driven. But also I would be interested to hear from anybody who thinks their high street is really brilliant and why that is. Okay, any other questions?
I was wanting to pick up on the point of the bookstore. 2 short stories. I live in Camden. We used to have 3 bookstores. 2 have now shut down. We're left with the Waterstones, which I used to love. I was forced out of my Waterstones when I kept going in to buy books. They were never available, and I was told there was a 2 to 3 week delivery time. And because I was going overseas, I couldn't afford to wait that long. So I was forced online and discovered that I could get them within half a week off Amazon for half the price. And I'm sad. I don't like shopping off Amazon. It's a bastard big global company. But Amazon now reluctantly have my business. A local store my son and I do love is Maplin's, and we love the people who are knowledgeable and whatever there. My son has just discovered in the last week that some walkie-talkies we were looking at getting, he can, with his valuable pocket money, buy online through Amazon again, I think it is. Yep, through Amazon for half price. So I guess my question, and sorry, I sort of third background point on me, I used to own and run a bar. And so I'm well aware of business rates and just how huge they are. And I hear the frustration of some of the speakers about trying to deal with that. And I also hear, trying to put NHS, which is wonderful. My question is, are there any other radical things that we can do to regain this equality, either by raising something in the online community, taxes or something, or doing something? But there needs to be more equality on that price front. So I would welcome radical suggestions from the front or from the floor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Francis. I come from an architecture and planning background. So we've talked a lot about changing spatial implications as commodity shopping may migrate online and the advent of self-driving cars. And I'm wondering, Eva, it seems like there's some natural pairs that might be able to inhabit new spaces, so the beer and nappies and things like that. And how do designers, planners, and communities have access to that kind of data to create these new spaces or partnerships that are a result of the changing kind of spaces due to technology? And how is it not that it will just be Argos or Amazon deciding that they're going to open up a, beer and game console store? How do communities have access to some of the things that might be natural fits from the big data that they generated themselves?
I just wanted to go back to this idea of creativity. I think consumer culture at large is so unsustainable that we just aren't going to be able to have shops in the distant future as we do now, and the consumer culture that we do. That's one thing, and it sounds quite very to be down with consumer culture because obviously it's everywhere. But I do think that the high streets themselves could potentially be spaces that really sort of foster community interaction by things like your reuse scheme, and just facilitate creative things for interaction, where people get to know each other and actually interact rather than just that being through the shopping. I used to work for a supermarket for about 5 years, and the number of people that would just come in every day just to buy one thing and spend about 15 minutes chatting with the staff or people they meet in there. Shopping is not just about the product, it's about the social relations that it actually entails. And I think that we need to realise that as a society, we've got so much potential to foster social relations in spaces that we have, such as high streets and the outside shopping centres. There's so much unused space that could have the potential to actually create things for everyone, not just people with loads of disposable income. And secondly, also, it's a bit jumbled, I think we've really got to think about the waste. Like, we can't keep consuming how we consume now. It's just not sustainable. And there's no point looking to the future of consumer culture as we know it, because it can't last.
People can come back. I'd be very interested for any comments on some of the, for instance, just here about, can consumer culture last? I mean, is the problem that we're all consuming a little bit too much and have to step back a bit, if you like? And it was quite similar to a few of the things Susan was also talking about in terms of looking at work, the pressures of work, and revaluing, if you like, what work is, so that people have more time to communicate with each other and have and build a social relations with each other. So there are a number of things. So even the whole thing about people talked about not enough parking space, a lot of high fees for parking. Is the answer less cars and another way of operating? Quite like to hear what the panel thinks about some of these things as well, because I think they are in an odd way connected very much to that discussion on high streets.
Can I come back to the person who mentioned Amazon at the back, because I think it probably brings in a few of the themes. I mean, Amazon has succeeded because it's brilliant. People have turned away from lots of traditional retailers and chosen to buy from Amazon because it offers great prices and it offers brilliant convenience. Does that mean the end of the shop? No, it doesn't. It means that other retailers need to either up their game or do things that Amazon cannot do. That might be exclusive product, as lots of retailers sell, or it might be things like service. The person there from Blackwell's was talking about some of the challenges in that market, the changes in books. Blackwell's is still here. I'm not quite sure how well you're doing. Maybe you might tell us. But interestingly, I think I'm right in saying you changed the business model, didn't you? Was it not sort of given to the staff, or there's some sort of share deal has been done? Brilliant high streets that I think will always thrive as long as they keep what makes them great now. Probably be a bit London-centric because of living in London, but I would say Green Lanes in Haringey is a fantastic shopping street in the main, full of independent shopkeepers, as well as the likes of Tesco and Sainsbury's, and very much constantly changing and renewed by various different groups of immigrants that have come there. But the final point I'd make that I think brings it all together is, whether the high street needs shops, what sorts of shops it needs, whether there should be other services there. It's up to you, because in the end, successful retail is dictated by how people choose to spend their money, as well as the other factors. I did think that Tottenham Hale example was a fantastic one, actually, because it does show, I think it's a great example of how retail can thrive by being near other services, but equally sort of reflecting a genuine local need that isn't just about spending.
Can I come in on the back of that point? Because currently in London we're seeing quite a significant shift from office space to residential in some areas, and clearly that's part of a direction of policy travel from a planning perspective, but actually that has some quite important ramifications for commercial areas in London in particular, but also in other cities, where if you start to replace office space with residential, that can have some impacts on the viability of commercial areas. They're very reliant on lunchtime trade and other things, and that's been touched on in other observations by the panel. Also, just on the consumption point, there's some really interesting changes which have taken place since 2008, when actually consumer basket sizes have fallen. People now shop much more to need, and what we haven't seen at the back end of, even recently, we haven't seen a sort of rebound in that activity, even as there have been some quite limited improvements in sort of consumer spending power. So actually lots of retailers are sat there and they can see that people aren't filling their baskets in the same way, they're shopping more frequently, and that's making people change their models. And you can see the rise of discounters. People are much more focused on value, and I think there's an expectation that won't change, and perhaps the way it has done at the end of other periods of economic downturn. The final point I'd make is around business rates. There was a very good observation about the impact which it has, but also the potential to use it as a mechanism to penalise. I mean, if you look at the retail sector, it generates 5% of GDP, 10% of taxes are paid by the sector, and 25% of business rates. I think any solution which looks to sort of come up with an answer within the retail sector is doomed to failure. You have to come to a fundamental reform of the system which actually looks across the piece, looks at what it's trying to achieve, and do something a bit more objective in that space.
Yeah, that's why we were shocked, absolutely shocked, when Osborne decided to abdicate responsibility and kicked the ball in the long grass by shooting off the business rates to local councils. I work with local councils a lot. Hackney has got one dude who negotiates 300 leases. One. But what's he going to do? He barely survives. He actually doesn't survive most of it. The same in Camden. One person negotiating the deals with every location Camden owns. He's brilliant, but he's one. They're not going to give him another one. What's he going to do exactly? Develop suddenly global strategic import policy for Camden? No way. Nothing is going to happen. So northern powerhouses, Rochdale, 30% shops closed. With all the business rates they can keep, they are tiny. They're not going to do anything. The business rates delegation actually is going to look worse than the better. So the best people you can do is just walk up and walk Labour, because Labour would change it. But that's just me. So on the topic of data, because that's my bag, and I think that's a very important issue, we don't really have open data for the cities. We have battled and struggled and tried, and it's just not happening. The reason why it's not happening, because it's so bloody expensive to get it. And with all the goodwill in the world at the moment, the local data company, which we have enormous privilege to work with, and it's Matthew Hopkinson, who is a data pioneer of urban data in retail, they gather data with a bunch of housewives going around with a clipboard. I'm not kidding you. This data is the best data in town because it's accurate. It's evaluation of open and closed shops on daily basis. You can supplement with geolocation sensors, so they're piloting that as well, but that's hitting privacy. So we had a big debate last week on the privacy. Are people prepared to share this data? Would you be prepared to tell that you really want to shop for, condoms, nappies, and console at the same go? Would you? Because I'm not sure. So if people were prepared to share their shopping data, we could provide very good answers to what's needed per location, to what's needed in Bristol, to what's needed in Wandsworth. But I'm not seeing the appetite of people to share it. This is really intimate stuff. People don't want to share data. Well, the companies who collect it pay a lot of money to collect it, and they pay a lot of money to keep it, to clean it, to store it, to publish it. It's a big money involved in all this. And with best will in the world, I have not found a way to open it. We have access to very, very good data sets. They're all available for research. If you're a PhD, by all means, but they're all closed. So I'm not seeing any obvious transition at the moment until we decide that we want to share it. And when we have cybersecurity in place, that we share it safely. So the data is truly anonymized. Because, a lot of people buy things they shouldn't. And if they share that might come back on them. And that's the willingness to share shopping data is about -10. So we are up against that. We haven't solved it. We just had a big event in Cyber Salon to debate that. I had Matthew exactly with that, because we can see the need for open data on the high street, because we could provide resilience with that. Difficult. If anybody has got any bright ideas, we're running loads of campaigns to figure it out, but at the moment it's difficult. And just to finish it off, in terms of the data and cybersecurity, again, the sharing of the data is the easy bit. Protecting the data is hard. So there's a big need for cybersecurity solutions for the high street data, because every step of the way forward, we could provide them in a more open way. So at the moment, I give you an example. Most of data sits in Steed Institute in Oxford. So retailers who don't like sharing data, but agree to provide it for research, they put it in a secure storage in Oxford. Very, very hard to get it. Only a bunch of PhDs get access to it. Why is that? Because cybersecurity, A, for the retailer, 2, for the consumer. It is not the data that's, people are preferred to open up to float in the cyberspace. It's just not safe. So we are missing the gap, which is missing the cybersecurity.
Just lots of thoughts. But I guess just quickly, I agree with your point that how we're consuming. We're over-consuming, and I think a lot of the reasons we're able to do that is the pricing structures make sense at the moment. And there are some reasons why it is possible for us to consume cheap electronics made in China, but some that might change in the future if we factored in the costs of all the transportation costs, and if Chinese workers were paid and worked in standards that we were happy for our workforce to work in, it might be different. I also think it's just really fragile for our economy to be working like this. Literally, the ships come over from China full of electronics, and we send them back full of empty boxes because because we have all these empty boxes for recycling, and China could even recycle those better than we can. So I'm really scared about that. I think it's a really fragile position for our economy to be in. So I think one thing that could change, which would be difficult for politics to accept this, but I think we could just change what we tax. So I think we should stop taxing income so much, and also stop taxing business rates so much, and maybe shift to taxing land. Also maybe taxing waste better, or taxing pollutants better. So that's something that I think is quite interesting. However, if you look at the people responsible for regulation and for tax compliancy, there's a huge conflict of interest, and there's the International Monetary Fund actually kind of described the City of London as a tax haven because of the state of regulatory capture, that the taxation, that there's just such a conflict of interest, people that work in taxation and the big businesses that they're supposed to be regulating. So I think that's a real conflict of interest. The third thing I'll just talk about is if someone mentioned any good ideas, any radical things that could be different or could work differently. So I suppose I got into the field of the Brixton Pound, which is the area of alternative currencies. And I suppose we're coming from the idea that if there's problems in the way that money is circulating, can we create our own money that does it better? And that's kind of a different debate. But there are some interesting examples from around the world, or even with some local authorities where they've done things like there's an organisation called Spice Time Credits, and what they do is they give people credits for volunteering, and then they try and negotiate discounts in businesses or leisure centres or football matches so they can go and spend the time credits there. So that's kind of an interesting way of trying to use spare capacity in businesses for people to go and be able to spend not money in there, but these alternative credits. So that's a small example in the UK, but maybe there are other ways that we could create different types of money that would redress some of these imbalances in the way that national currencies are currently working or not working.
Okay, I'm going to take a final round of any points, any questions. Feel free to contradict anything that's been said on the panel, or come up with your own ideas about how to keep the high street thriving. I tend to think the way to stop empty boxes going back to China is to have a much more productive economy in this country, because I think, a lot of the reasons come down to the fact that we don't, create the basis for, as it happens, more wealth. It might mean more consumption, but I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I was just going to talk on that point, actually, because I think the discussion is very much taken in the economy as it has been sort of in the last 5 to 7 years, where the British economy is procrastinating. We hear politicians saying about we're coming to recovery, but really we are lacking in any major initiatives, such as building nuclear power stations, more airports, more the HS2, massive housing programs, building new towns, the fracking. These are all the things that would create
prosperity, to create disposable income, if we could all be more prosperous and live much more wealthier lives. And that would allow the sort of craft shops and the independent shops that thrive in more affluent areas, where in the poorer areas we have high streets that are filled of hair and beauty shops, of off licenses and fast food takeaways in between the shops that are just closing down and empty. What we need is more prosperity. I think I've got a real problem with the person who said that we consume too much, because in my view we just don't make enough. We need to see human beings as creative people and productive people who can make things and solve the problems of the future. And it's not that we don't consume too much. The problem is we don't consume and make enough. Thank you.
I guess building on that idea that we need to be more creative, I'm thinking maybe flipping the question a little bit and thinking, do we still need high streets? Yeah, I guess this is a battle of ideas, so I tend to really suggest that the high street is sort of inherently exploitative. You're either a consumer or a producer, and in that sense it always will be. And any attempts to change that under the current system seems to be failing. But in Brixton, you were saying the rents, the council's caught in a catch-22, it can't do much. I went and saw a little film at LSE the other week called Ordinary Streets, and there was a few activists there who've been involved for decades, saying that local democracy is just not working. For sort of independent shop owners, that they have no autonomy on their own high streets anymore. They can't change things. So maybe we need to be thinking more creatively, a little bigger about do we need high streets, or can we appropriate some other public space for our sort of communities and society?
I'm from New Zealand, and I've always said if I came to power, was a politician in New Zealand, there's only one policy I'd instigate, and that is, growing up as a kid in New Zealand, there was equality, because whether you were rich or poor, you could have an annual holiday on the beach. You could either own a palatial house on the beach, or you could camp at a government-owned campsite or privately owned campsite, which would cost you next to nothing to camp on a daily basis. Which leads me on to planning. And my son actually prompted the point, because he lives down in Putney and remarked that he likes the Putney High Street because of the variety. So I've thought about one possibly radical solution to my previous question about what can we do to equalise things. And that is, why can we not have local councils have a planning solution to say, right, on every high street within an area, we will have, say, 20% of outlets that have to be leisure, 20% have to be food, no more than 15% can be fashion, no more than 20% can be coffee shops or whatever. And also maybe, well, definitely 10% at least have to be hardware or something practical. So there's and in my own place of Camden, you know, some of the shops, I'm staggered. We're losing all the practical shops. So they're full of cafes or fashion shops or real estate agents. Down Parkway, every single shop now, a lot of them are real estate agents. So one of my radical solutions is, let's have the planners and the council impose the quotas for a category of a whole variety of leisure and shopping things.
Yeah, I just wanted to build up on that kind of a mixing of things. And I think one of the spaces that does that quite well is often our markets. I mean, you live in Camden, so you'd know quite a lot about that. I'm finding that markets are now becoming also tourist spaces, but they're also quite good for people just to congregate. And I think it's that kind of space where actually it's not about having a big holding, but a much smaller mix of holdings. It could also be quite exciting on a high street, rather than depending on big companies to solve all our problems.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take the speakers in reverse order, and you are summing up. 1 or 2 minutes each. Susan?
Cool. Right. I won't have time to respond, so there's lots of really interesting points there. I kind of agree with the sentiment the person said we need more building of, well, they said high speed 2 and airports. I sort of agree with the sentiment, but the opposite thing. So I think we should be investing in low carbon transport, housing, And I think we should be looking to localise some food production, produce more food in the UK, and localise financial services. And I think that would solve a lot of problems and would create a lot of employment. So I do think we could consume more, but consuming different types of things. I don't know that I'd want local authorities to be that directly involved in planning in the way that the gentleman suggested. I think there's some interesting examples of local authorities trying to create ecosystems. So one of the United States I quite like is the example of called Cleveland Cooperatives. And what they did is they supported industries that could supply other industries. So, for example, they supported, within support, there was a big cooperative that produces lettuce for the local hospital, and it works because there's demand for that service. I'd be a bit worried if local authorities were planning or helping businesses where there was no demand for the services. So that might be something to think about. My final point, I suppose, is just I think if you're worried like I am about the economy, a really good way to see what's going wrong is to look at what is on our high streets. There are banks on our high streets, but go into a bank and try and speak to a bank manager. Often there's no one that can really talk to you or give you any actual advice or any actual support if you're a small business particularly. And there are lots of big multinational companies. Ask who owns them, ask where they pay their tax. If you ask those sort of questions, I think you'll see a lot of the problems that we face in our economy, and I think we can change it, but it's going to take quite a lot of shift of direction of where we're going at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I perhaps unsurprisingly disagree with the person who thought that high streets are inherently exploitative. You're either a consumer or a seller. I think that's probably not the way that is going to really bring much change to our high streets. I think doing things by quota, trying to make people behave in a certain way through planning, sometimes that might work, sometimes, probably most of the time, it doesn't. And the result is that you do get changes to great streets. I agree about Camden Parkway compared to what it was like. It's probably a less rich street. But in the end, I think it really comes back to the consumer. All of you here, you make decisions every day about where you spend and what you spend on. And you can't underestimate the power of the consumer. Only a few years ago, people used to think that Tesco controlled not just the high street, but the whole of British retail. Look what has happened to it in the last 3 years. It has come under immense competitive pressure. And that shows that the world of retail changes, and it is frequently driven by how consumers behave, and you'll get the sort of high street that you dictate in that sense.
Thank you.
You know, with fast fashion and Primark, the whole thing went completely out of proportion, but unfortunately social media feeding it. So the direction of travel is opposite to what you say at the moment. The direction of travel is more consuming. Fast fashion, women don't want to be seen in clothes more than twice because, oh my God, they'll be seen on Instagram. I mean, this is what's happening, honestly. So the fast fashion chains are growing very, very fast. So you have to talk to a lot of people to fix that. So that's a question mark. But, you know, for me, the recipe for improvements is quite straightforward. Cut business rates, introduce better parking facilities in high streets. Considering September was the peak purchase of cars in UK ever, I think we have to get our heads out of the sand and tell the councils we are a car community, for now at least. More parking and accountability and transparency for the owners of the shops. Data, at the moment we have no data who owns what, so it's very difficult to make people accountable if their shops have been closed by more than 3 years. So if we could introduce index of efficiency of using of the shops to business, to pension funds and assets managers who own shops that are closed for many years, and force them to sell it so we can make better use of it, I think that will solve it.
Thank you. And finally.
Thank you. I think I'm most struck by the degree of alignment in terms of some of the key challenges, and that's not just the people sat at the panel, but also in the room. There were lots and lots of fresh ideas about ways to tackle those challenges, and I think quite a degree of optimism, which was striking. Shops will continue to have a vital role to play on the high street, but the process may be painful for some as they adapt. And just on the planning point, like others, I'd be wary of something that was a top-down quota-based approach. But there is an important point there, which is it's the quality of local interaction as you build your vision for a local area and your local strategic plan, which is really important. So that can't just be the local council's responsibility. It needs communities, it needs local businesses to work together. And the ones who are doing that are the ones who are best prepared, I think.
Shall we give our panel a final round of applause?